and I muted myself. So that is one of the first obligations of the host. And can everybody hear me tonight? Awesome. Very cool. My name is Rashida Tyler. Before we begin, if you need Spanish translation or would like Spanish translation, on the bottom of your screen, there should be a globe icon. Please select the globe icon and it should say interpretation. And we are very fortunate to have Isabella Beretta tonight, who is translating for us. So I do want to give folks a moment to make their way over to the interpretation channel. Until then, I would actually like to hold space and to give a moment of silence for the 8 people who were killed in, 6 of whom were Asian, who were recently killed in a racially motivated shooting on Tuesday. So if we can have 30 minutes or 30 seconds of silence, thank you. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Rashida Tyler. I'm a member of the Ulster County Coalition for Housing Justice. I'm also founder of the Real Kingston Tenants Union. The Ulster County Coalition for Housing Justice is a coalition of organizations that came together in May of last year, of 2020, as a spin-off group from the Kingston Emergency Food Collaborative. Our goal was to respond to the housing crisis as rapidly as our community was responding to hunger in the face of the pandemic. The coalition members include the Ulster Immigrant Defense Network, Rise Up Kingston, O Positive, the Real Kingston Tenants Union, and Kingston Housing. We have also worked in coalition with other groups in Kingston, throughout Kingston, who are integral to housing. And we have conversations with groups such as Wednesday Walks for Black Lives and other groups throughout Kingston to interface with the public. So tonight we will be discussing the housing, specifically solutions to the intensifying housing crisis. Last May, I spoke to the City Council Subcommittee on Housing and warned of evictions, a tsunami of evictions to be precise. The eviction moratorium, if the eviction moratorium was not extended past June. That threat is actually still with us and has become a reality for far too many across New York State, with over 200 evictions being filed in Albany in one day. There are similar numbers predicted to be filed throughout our region. The housing crisis is itself a public health emergency. The reality is too many people in Kingston and Ulster County are not only living with the stresses and fear brought on by the pandemic, but also living in fear of homelessness and displacement and they were doing so long before COVID-19. They were living in fear that the next knock at the door could be that of a sheriff to execute the eviction warrant. So tonight, we are going to be joined by a panel of speakers who have been directly impacted by the housing crisis, who are policymakers and who are elected officials who are dealing directly with the housing crisis. Tonight we'll hear from Marissa McClinton and Diana Lopez, members of our community who have been directly impacted by the housing crisis, as well as Ulster County Comptroller March Gallagher, who will share with us some pertinent data on the contributing factors to the county-wide housing crisis and the unfolding housing insecurity that prevails throughout Ulster County and what that means for us. And we will also hear from Elena Martinez, who will share with us how the housing crisis is impacting the undocumented community. And we will hear from Deputy County Executive Evelyn Wright on the obstacles and choices that we must face in order to provide dignified and affordable housing and to everyone, and the consequences that will happen if we don't. And so with that, I would love to turn it over to Deanna Lopez. Deanna is an organizer with Nobody Leaves Mid-Hudson, their Kingston office, and she's lived in Kingston for 22 years since her family moved from Mexico. And she knows the city, her community, and she's been organizing around issues impacting the Latino and Hispanic community, including healthcare, immigration, housing, and education. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Diana.
Thank you, Rashida. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Great, thank you. Rashida did a presentation. My name is Diana, pronoun she, her, hers, community organizer with Nobody Leaves. And yeah, I am an impacted person. As Rashida said, I've been living in Kingston for 20 and so years, ever since I was 3.5, brought from Oaxaca, Mexico. And to be honest, from that moment, from when I was here until now, I literally been in around, I would say like 25 houses, if not maybe even so, like more. My parents as immigrants had a really hard time finding housing in Kingston, and because of so many barriers. First, the language, and second, right, of a lot of folks that would take advantage of that language barrier to make a lot of profit from our families. One instance that I really remember and was really heartbreaking for me was, so there was a time when my parents didn't have a job, and they were struggling. They were trying to figure out how they were gonna put food on our table. And so, and the landlord, my parents were never late on rent, but that 1 month that my parents couldn't pay, they try to speak to the landlord, and I was like their translator, the interpreter. At that age, I was probably like 9 or so, and I was interpreting for my parents. And my parents were like, well, tell him that right now we can't pay him because we don't have a job, but that we will get caught up as soon as we have one. And so I told the landlord that, and he was like, well, that's not my problem. Like, I want my money. And I told my parents that, and the landlord was like, well, if you don't have my money, then you guys need to like move out so I can have other folks come in and rent it, because I need the money. And so my parents like ask him, okay, just give us 1 week, to get this money together and we can get it to you. So my parents had to, reach out to my uncles, a couple uncles that we had here, to let them borrow the money for the rent. But just seeing my parents like, very worried and stressful about that, was really like, to me as a child, was like, what can I do to help my parents, right? Like, I can't do anything. And the years went on. We started hearing more about, like what we were protected under and stuff. But there was always that that thing of like, we're immigrants, and we don't have a voice, right? And if we go and filed anything, like, they're not gonna listen to us. And right now, even my parents have a hard time finding a place because of, they ask for background checks. They ask for like first month's rent, last month's deposit, and it's just a lot of money. They were actually renting a house in Ulster Park that was $2,000. And they had no choice to rent it because there was like to find housing here is like to find like a needle, right? Like a lost needle. That's how bad it is. My sister too, she has her own family. She's been trying to find a place. The landlord where she's living right now was like, because I've seen that the rents are going high up, like I'm gonna raise your rent for $200 more. And they're already paying $1,800. So he's like, we have until they made it like a 6-month lease. And he was like, well, when that lease is up, it's going to be month to month, but the rent is going to be $200 more because I've seen that the rent has been going up and other folks will pay for that money. Right. And so now they're trying to find a place. Right. And it's hard. It really, I'm a community organizer and I'm trying to help as much as I can, right? Not just my family, but hundreds of families are going through the same thing, and it's really hard. It really is. And I'm thankful to be a part of this panel and share my story, but I also want to give that message to folks, like, if you're going through something that is not right, please speak up, right? We need more folks to speak up. So the more people we are, the more power we have, right? And start like getting into these community events to learn more, because again, as the more we learn, the more we can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deanna. Thank you for telling your story. You brought up several very important points. Number one, of course, how this housing crisis is impacting our children, what they're seeing, what they're remembering, how they're understanding what their families and what their our parents are going through. And the other very important point that you bring up is, of course, to speak up. We as advocates, we can advocate, but nothing is more powerful than someone who has that firsthand experience coming forward. And we urge people to do so. We urge our community really to have a conversation and to look, and to be open-minded and to have these conversations. So thank you so much, Diana. Thank you for sharing your experiences. You are an incredible organizer. And it's also the people who are most directly impacted, who are typically on the front lines doing the fighting. So thank you.
Thank you to all.
With that, I'm going to introduce a young woman who I met about almost 2 years ago. An incredible, passionate organizer and advocate, Marissa McClinton. She is a lifelong resident of Ulster County, an advocate for social justice, and an activist for community reform. Her passion and drive was born from climbing the mountain of homelessness, poverty, assault, and hunger, and with her 2 children in tow. She has pushed, scraped, and fought to gain a better footing in such uncertain times. Marissa is a reformer, pioneer, and a voice for the people so commonly forgotten. I also want to mention that Marissa is running for Ulster County Legislature for District 12. So I'm going to say thank you so much, Marissa, and for being here tonight, and I can't wait for people to hear your story.
Thank you so much, Rashida. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you all for listening to me, and thank you so much just for this time to tell my story. So like Rashida said, yes, I am running for Ulster County Legislator because my story is the story of so many people in our community, our family. I have been an employee for the state for 8 years. So I have a long track record of working, employment, with very little breaks in between. But in 2019, when the former president, I will not say his name, decided to shut down the government for 35 days for really no reason at all besides a pissing contest, that means that my state job was furloughed because we were at the bottom of we were at the bottom of the barrel when it came to staffing and who was important during that time. Who do we pay first? And me and my department were basically at the bottom of the barrel. So we were furloughed. We weren't fired. We were furloughed. So that meant that we were not getting paid. That meant that I was not making my normal salary, which afforded me housing previously. So without working, there's no money coming in at all whatsoever. And as a single mother of two children, one about to go to college, it was devastating. And I had no choice. I was living in a house, a standing alone house, but it was an out of state developer. So when New York was having issues, that developer didn't care because they were in Georgia. Just like Diana's story, it didn't matter. We just want our money and we'll find somebody else who will pay. So we had to go. So I had to find a safe place for my children, and I lived in my car. I packed my essentials. I still went to work, mind you. We still had to go to work and not get paid. That's the worst thing. You have to still show up for your job and you're not making anything. So I had to pack my essentials. I had to pack my work clothes and my makeup and my hair stuff and maybe some wigs and some good shoes. And we had to go. It was about May of 2019, and I lived in my car until about October of 2019. So I lived in my car the entire summer. So I've experienced things living in my car that a lot of people probably wouldn't want to admit to, especially being a worker, being an employee. I had to go to work every day and put makeup on and look like nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, I would leave work and I had to sleep in the backseat of my car with the windows down because it was summer and it was hot. In the morning, I'd have to get up at 3 a.m. to go to the local fitness park because they had public bathrooms, and I had to go there to, wash up, to wash my face and bird bath and get myself dressed 3 a.m. And I did that. I did it at 3 a.m. so nobody would see me, so nobody would see that I was getting ready for work in a public bathroom. So there was shame behind it. There was embarrassment behind it. On the weekends, when most people enjoy Fridays and can't wait to go home and party with their friends, I went to the gas station and bought maybe a salad and a Slim Jim and went to the park and ride, and I sat in my back seat on a Friday night by myself. After about a month of doing that, I noticed that there were 4 other families living out there in their cars. And when I say families, not just, a mother and a father, there were mother, fathers, and children living in their cars as well. So the few months that I was living out there, I got to talking with a lot of these people, and their stories were very similar. The furloughs and the government shutdowns and the cutting off of the benefits and the cutting off of the access to housing affected more people than really the public wanted to understand. So when I'm out there, woe is me in my car, I'm sitting there looking at families, mother, fathers, and children doing the same thing, having the same shame. We all got up at 3, 4 in the morning and we all went to the same bathroom and tried to bird bath so we can go to work and get on with our lives just for one more day. I found myself eating out of dumpsters. I found myself, now mind you, I'm working 40 hours a week and I still have bills. I still have a car payment and insurance, cell phone, money for my kids for just to live so they can go to school, had to do laundry, still had to live my life. But my house was a 4-door sedan. So I found myself on the weekends, I would go down to the riverfront. And when the affluent people that would come up from the city, they would get off their boats and they would, get dinner or lunch or whatever at Shadows. They would drop their food, whatever they didn't eat, whatever leftovers they had, they would just drop it in the parking lot. And I had to wait for them to leave, and that was my dinner or my lunch. There were days I had nothing because sometimes dumpsters didn't have any food. I figured out what the schedules were for the diners on when they threw out their discarded food, Dunkin' Donuts, things like that. Again, I was working 40 hours a week. I was a victim of my government failing me. And I was tossed out on the street because of an out-of-state developer, because of gentrification, because of selfishness, not selflessness, but selfishness. A lot of people like to declare homeless people to be on drugs or to be lazy or to be just, they don't want to do anything. I worked 40 hours a week, not on drugs, not on alcohol, nothing. I slept in my car because my government told me I could not work anymore for no reason. So um, there were times where I was fearful. I did have weapons in my car because I was a female by myself. There was one night where I woke up and it was 2 a.m. and there was a man in my back seat. I don't know where he came from, but he saw me parked there every single night for months and he thought he was just going to take a chance. And I woke up to a man in my back seat. That was the consequence of me being homeless and sleeping in my car. So despite having to deal with that at 2 a.m., I still had to go to work. I still had to make sure my kids had something to eat and their clothes were clean. I still had to put makeup on and go to work and smile and, be the joyous person that I've always been. Despite being homeless, despite being assaulted, despite having to eat out of dumpsters, I still had to go and push through that embarrassment, shame, and pain. When I asked the police, for some assistance, maybe some guardianship in a park and ride that we were all living in, they did one drive through and that was it. The guy that assaulted me lived there also. This is a park and ride, mind you. He lived there also. And I had no solace. I had no protection. So I had to park my car somewhere else. I had to fight the police. I had to constantly explain why I was out there at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning in places that cops know people aren't allowed to be. I had to explain to them why I'm there. I had to explain to people that I knew, friends, why they couldn't come over, why we weren't having parties on the weekends. I had to explain to people what my situation was. And that wasn't the moment that I decided to fight against homelessness. I've been fighting homelessness probably all my life. I grew up poor in a single parent home. I've been homeless previous, but I was living in a pregnancy shelter at the time. But still, I see people that sleep in parks, that sleep on park benches. I've helped people get food out of dumpsters. I have no shame. I've helped people get food from the back of Dunkin' Donuts, stuff that you guys throw away, empty bags of chips and maybe have some crumbs, something to just put on your tongue because you're hungry, or maybe a little bit of water, a capful of water from a discarded water bottle meant an hour of solace or satisfaction for us, for me, for people, children, families out there that had nowhere else to go. So and that's just a corner of my experiences. I just gave you guys the highlights, and there's tons more. 9 months sleeping in my car in the middle of summer in the Hudson Valley is is not pleasant at all. But I just want to remind you all that it happens to all of us. This is not a partisan issue. This is not a Democrat Republican issue. This is not a on drugs not on drugs issue. This is not a poverty middle class issue. This is an issue that can happen to anybody. I worked and continued to work. I still have the same job, have the same boss, have the same friends. It happened to me because of somebody higher up with their own personal agenda. So I want you all to understand that this is something that is all of our problem. It's all of our issue, and this is all of something that we all can fix and we all can take care of. So I thank you all for allowing me to tell my story. And I really hope that you all understand that it's going to take all of us to combat this issue. So thank you all and have a great night.
Thank you so much, Marissa. Thank you for sharing your story. I really admire your courage, your strength, and just you. So very thankful that you shared your story with us. And so when advocates speak, we often carry the stories of others with us. Oftentimes you hear experts and they're stating statistics and data, but those are people's lives and those are people's stories. And we are very fortunate to have two individuals, Diana and Marissa, who are here today to share their stories with us. And so speaking of numbers and speaking of data, those are very important because that's really what our government uses to decide how to allocate resources and where there is an issue. And so the importance of data is cannot be understated. Which is why we are very grateful to have our comptroller, March Gallagher, with us here this evening. March serves as the Ulster County Comptroller and attorney. She's an attorney with a master's degree in public policy and environmental studies, and she's worked as the Deputy Director of Planning and Head of Economic Development for Ulster County from 2009 to 2013. After she left her service at the county, she served as the Chief Strategy Officer for Pattern for Progress, where she wrote and presented regional studies on infrastructure and healthcare. Immediately before being elected County Comptroller, she served as the President and CEO of the Community Foundations of the Hudson Valley. So I want to say thank you so much to March Gallagher and welcome.
Thank you so much, Rashida. Thanks for inviting me. It's actually
March,
really
we just want to interrupt you for a second.
sure.
We want to, because Isabel, it looks to us as if you're muted and we're not hearing you on the Spanish channel.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was muted. I don't know why.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So,
Good.
sorry.
All
Go
right,
ahead.
no problem. Good. I'm glad we're set. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here.
Tenerme aquí. Es un honor estar aquí
Oh,
con
now
ustedes.
I can
Okay.
hear Isabel.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Should I
Maybe she
keep
does
talking?
need to be, yeah, Isabel, maybe you do need to be muted for,
Okay.
maybe, no, you know
No,
what? Maybe,
March,
I think-
March may have on
Yeah.
the Spanish language, turn it off,
no,
interpretation.
no, I think Isabel, you need to click on the Spanish on your screen at the bottom where it says Spanish. And then unmute and talk.
Okay. This is Spanish, but I clicked
Oh.
there, but it's not, I don't know. I think it's not working.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yes, we do. Oh, wait. Try now.
Okay. These things are
It's-
complicated.
They are. It was like, Isabel, try talking now. So just want to see. Okay, so I'm not hearing Isabel in the English channel.
She is in the
So-
Spanish channel.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
Perfect.
That's great.
Yay.
All right. Sorry.
So that's okay. We've all had to learn so much. I really want to say to the folks that spoke before, Deanna and Marissa, you know, your stories mean so much. What Rashida's saying is so true, that we have to remember that every statistic is a person. And I'm going to share some statistics today that are literally thousands of people. So I really appreciate people being willing to share their own story. I think that's a really hard thing to do and really meaningful. So it really puts in perspective what we're talking about. I'm actually going to share my screen. I like being able to see people's faces, so I might turn it on and off, but I'm going to share a bunch of data with you guys, and sometimes numbers are better if you can see the pictures of it. And then, of course, the presentation, happy to share it with folks. So I'm going to share my screen right now and pop through a few slides, and then I'll pop out as well. Just bear with me. And can you guys see my screen? Yeah? Okay, great. All right, so I'm here today with you. You already know that. And I wanted to talk for a second just about why you would ask the controller to speak about this. One of the responsibilities of the controller's office under the charter of the county is to report on the financial condition of the county and the economy. And I think housing has really risen to be such a crisis in the county that you cannot talk about the economy of the county of Ulster County right now without talking about housing. I do have all these previous relationships, and I kind of wanted to disclose that, not so much as a brag, which it kind of feels like it is after Rashida's introduction, but more to say, like, I've been involved in a lot of these organizations. I'm going to share data from them, from the planning department, from Pattern for Progress. And, you know, I want you to know, I was the chair of the IDA that first brought housing into possibly being done as IDA projects, right? So I have a lot of thoughts about that in my head. I was the president and CEO of the Community Foundation when we funded the City of Kingston Land Bank. But I think the main reason that I've gotten involved in this conversation in a deeper way, aside from my charter responsibilities, is that I'm kind of just freaking out because I have friends and family who are literally homeless, people who are living in their cars, people who have left the state. And I see it really acutely right now, just on a very personal level. So I wanted to share that too. And I think I kind of went on an epic tirade rant a few months ago about homelessness, about the housing crisis, I should say, and have been invited to a number of things since then to talk about some of the numbers that I'm looking at. So I'm going to take you through some of that right now. You know, there have been 4 pretty significant housing studies like in the last year in Ulster County, not even, you know, the last 10 years, because there is stuff that's 10, 15 years old, right? We had a tri-county housing study with our neighboring counties that said we were supposed to build something like 1,200 units, and that's like 15 years ago, and we built like, you know, less than 100. So we know why we have a problem. But we had the vacancy study that CGR did when we were looking at the tenant protection law for Kingston. We have the regular Ulster County housing survey that the planning department puts out every year. We don't have the 2020 numbers yet. The one I'm talking about here and that you'll see data from is actually looking at 2019 data. We have the City of Kingston's vacant and abandoned properties report that Pattern for Progress did. And we have the Ulster County Housing Action Plan that I think Pattern for Progress also worked on for Ulster County, highlighted today in the New York Times, today, okay? So we have 4 major studies in the last year telling us, holy crow, we have a big problem. I want to just talk about the demographics of the county for a second, because they are changing. We're an aging county. Our age has, you know, gone up a couple years in the last, you know, 8 years. You know, I'm sure the census, when we get the 2020 numbers, it's going to show a little bit even more. Our population shrank from 180,000 to 178,665. I actually think that's not a 2020 number. It was 2019 ACS. And we've become a lot more diverse. Our Hispanic population grew 19.3% over that period of time. If we did not have growing Hispanic population, we would be hemorrhaging population. We'd be losing population at a very rapid pace. Years ago, when I was at Pattern for Progress, I convened 25 mayors and supervisors under their Urban Action Agenda project. And we went around the room and we said, say something new or something good. And Mayor Joe DiStefano kicked it off. He's from Middletown, and he said something new and something good in Middletown is that we have growing Hispanic population. And that is families moving in, buying buildings that are vacant, fixing them up, putting a business in, living upstairs. And 201, it went around the entire room, and every single mayor and supervisor at the table agreed the growing Latino population is a great thing for their community. I wish I had audio or video of that event. It was shocking to me. But it really, we need to look at growing Hispanic population as a huge resource for the area and a benefit to our communities. Let's talk about what our housing stock looks like. It is 69% owner occupied. And that varies, by the way, across the county, right? In Kingston, only 47% of the housing is owner occupied. In New Paltz, it's as low as 27%. In Hurley, it's 89%. 89% of the people living in Hurley own their own house. New Paltz makes sense, right? It's a lot of college students. And Kingston at 47 is roughly half and half. But the housing stock is old here. It's, you know, 25% of the stock is over 80 years old, 60% is over 50 years old. A lot of this data is in the most recent report that Ulster County highlighted, and Evelyn may be talking about this in a little bit more detail in a bit. But this aging housing stock really means that we have some problems. We have lead paint, we have energy inefficiency, and we have aging water and sewer systems. So there really are some problems that come with it. You don't think to yourself, right? To say a house is over 50 years old, when was that house built? 1970. To me, 1970 is a new structure, especially sort of growing up around here, right? So we have an aging housing stock, and, you know, areas where we are more home ownership and areas where we are less. So it's a very diverse county. It's not one look. But what I really want to talk about with you today is like, what has exacerbated the housing crisis in Ulster County? What are the factors? I see three main things, and they're all related. We've had major housing complexes flip. Since 2018, we've seen a tremendous volume of transactions. I'm going to talk about that in more detail. We have the short-term rental market. You know, Airbnb was not a thing 15 years ago, and now it's a huge issue. And then we have rising real estate prices, which is a result of these other two things, but was probably happening naturally anyway. I was working in Poughkeepsie in 2018, and I went out to lunch with somebody who works at a funeral parlor, and he's, you know, a real estate investor on the side. And he said to me, "What the heck's going on in Kingston? There's so many, you know, 1031 exchanges happening." That was kind of the first sign for me. I was like, wait, what is happening? So there are a lot of factors exacerbating the housing crisis right now. First, I want to talk about the complex flipping. All right. To my mind, and this is not a policy definition. This is not a real estate definition. This is like March Gallagher freaking out definition. To me, there is a difference between a sale and a flip. Okay. You've owned something for 20 years, you sell it, fine. You buy something and you sell it in 2 years, that's a flip to me. Okay. But we've had massive flips. I'm going to take you through. These are the flips I could think of off the top of my head. There's more. This is just what came to my mind. E&M Management bought all these properties in 2018. Stony Run, 267 units. Hudson Valley Landing, 68 units. Lakeshore Villas, 151 units. Black Creek Road, I don't know how many are there. It looks like 30. Sunset Gardens, 217 units. They bought all of those properties in 2018. They flipped all of them except Sunset Gardens in 2020. And actually, this is what pushed me over the edge. I went to Sunset Gardens. A dear friend of mine had to leave. She couldn't afford living there anymore. She's moved to Springfield and is living in a homeless shelter in Springfield. She asked me to go into her apartment, which was left unlocked, to take one of her prized possessions out, which, if any of you know, I grew up in Woodstock, and it happened to be a poster that the Rainbow Man had made, which might mean something to some of you. But I went to Sunset Gardens and I was blown away at how bad the conditions were there. The front door to her apartment building didn't even close. Here she is, priced out of a basement studio apartment, and the front door to these buildings doesn't even close in the middle of winter. I literally just sat in my car and cried when I left. In addition to the work E&M Management did, and now they flipped it to Acre, we have Mike Piazza, who was more of a hold. He had retained these properties for a good 10 years, but you had the pajama factory, the brush factory, and the shirt factory. That's 160 units sold. Dutch Village, a 2018 sale, 138 units sold. Barman Road, 26 units sold. That's a lot of units. Altogether here, this is over 1,000 units sold since 2018 of affordable housing, okay? Not stabilized, not rent controlled housing, not subsidized housing, normal affordable housing. 1,000 units flipped. I want to say something about Barman Road. I had a banker call me when Barman Road was for sale and say, it's for sale for 1.4 million. You know, find somebody to buy it and condo it. And the people who are living there, a lot of them are Section 8 tenants, could be owners for the same price they're paying. But it was the day before the sale, and it was just too soon to put anything together. And when I made the frantic calls to the philanthropists and the housing agencies, it was too outside the box for people to think about. We have to get to the place where we really are ready to think outside the box. So the second area where we've had just tremendous impact is short-term rentals. You know, my office did an audit of this in 2020, where we looked at the collection of occupancy tax. You know, we were able to identify there are a whole bunch of properties that are not registered to pay tax and are not paying any tax, so that's a problem. But more importantly, you know, aside from the revenue issues for the county, this is taking a huge number of units off the table that we're housing. The data I had, which I collected when I was campaigning in 2019, was showing that we had 1,800 units of housing that had been Airbnb. At that time, we had 149,000 guest arrivals in that year, 2018. Now, Airbnb is wised up because, of course, every time they put out a release, we were just like, the housing people would dig in, right? And the tax people, now they don't really release the same kind of information, but we know that in 2019, they had 184,000 guest arrivals reported. So likely is we had at least the same number of units, 1,800 units, and may have had more, okay? We may have more units of short-term rental housing now. Maybe it was mediated by the pandemic. I'm not certain of that, but in any case, at least 1,800 units of housing that has been dedicated to short-term rentals. That has had a huge impact. So you're talking 1,000 in flips of multi-unit tenancies, 1,800 in short-term rentals. Now let's talk about prices for a second. So the first thing I want to bring your attention to is this sales price. I looked at the sales prices that were reported in the report that Pattern for Progress did that's on the county website, the recent county report. This is different data. This is data from NYSAR, the New York State Association of Realtors. These are single family homes. These do not include for sale by owner, and they also do not include sales for $1, where there's maybe a transfer inside of a family. This is like true sales through realtors. And wow, we've had tremendous price inflation. In 2015, it was 192,500. Now it's 281. So we've gone up 46% in median home sale price in 5 years, 6 years. That's tremendous. That's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, this is a graph that is in the Ulster County Planning Department's annual rental housing survey. They send out surveys to all the landlords that they have relationships with. These are most often larger unit rentals, meaning landlords who are managing multiple units. In years past, this is the 2019 data you see here. In years past, they just aggregated it all together. And when I looked at the 2018 data, I saw it didn't say that prices had really gone up that much, which is not reality. So I would say when you're looking at any of this data, you have to do the reality checks and say to yourself, does that make any sense? You know, that vacancy report that the city of Kingston had that I highlighted, it came out in the fall. There was a census tract in there, a census block in there, I mean, that said that there had been that prices had declined, rental prices had declined. And I kind of lost it. I screenshotted it. I put it on the gentrification page on Facebook. And I was like, how is this possible? It has to do with like the small sample size, blah, blah, blah. But we all need our bullshit meter, excuse my French, BS meter up when we see stuff like this and call it out and say like that, you know, I don't care if the data, there's something wrong with your data. If it shows prices in Kingston went down, I'm sorry, no. So anyway, I went back to the planning department. I said to them, you know, this really doesn't strike me right that it's showing there's no increases. Can you stratify by number of bedrooms? This data is by number of bedroom. And you can see that it really has gone up significantly. If you look at the 2-bedroom, look at the yellow line there, you're seeing substantial price increase over the last few years. So we really have to pay attention to, you know, is this a unit a family can live in? You know, if a studio apartment has dropped, maybe that's because now we're calling closet studios. I don't know. But we all know that the prices are going up. And I think this data really shows that for every other size unit other than the studio, it really has gone up. All right. I'm going to move on for a minute. Let me just say 2 things about these pieces of data right here. The rental housing survey is only owners that respond. So it's not people that might have like one little, you know, 1 unit in their house or, you know, something like that. And the NYSAR data does not include for sale by owner, which could also be driving those prices. So, you know, is this a housing problem or is this an income problem? And I think that's a really important thing to think about. When I was at the Community Foundation, we did a lot of work on food security, and you know, we were worried about food deserts and we were worried about transportation. And the more I worked on it, I realized every single problem I'm working on is an income problem, okay, a wealth problem, right? Because if you don't have enough financial resources, you don't have a car, you can't drive to the store. if you're having a housing problem, it's because you can't afford housing. So I'm really starting to, in my own mind, frame these questions differently and say, it's not a food desert problem, okay? It's not a housing problem. It's a wealth inequity problem. And I think we need to start calling these things out as they are. But we've really seen that job growth has been in these low paying sectors. And I have to tell you, we see tremendous job growth coming down the pike in certain low paying jobs, you know, home health care, for example. We know we're going to have something like 20,000 new home healthcare jobs needed in New York State, and they don't pay enough. And that's something that we've been working on. You know, incomes have been stagnant or declining for everybody, and down 4% when you adjust for inflation, except the highest income earners. And then, you know, I think if you guys get free from this, after this, you want to look at something, look at that Ulster County report that really shows the cost burden. You know, 28% of renters and 15% of owners are severely cost burdened. What does that mean? They're spending more than 50% of their income on rent. But even if you just look at affordability, it's still, you know, less than half the renters in Ulster County are in affordable housing. And by affordable, we mean they're spending less than 30% of their income on housing. So we have a huge issue on our hands right now. And it's an income problem, and it's a wealth inequity problem. All right, I'm going to take you to my Ulster County housing stock number again. This is the number that I put together that I really wanted to share with you that kind of shocked me. We have, according to census data, you know, 84,874 total housing units in the county, and 69,539 of those are owner occupied, leaving 15,335 renter occupied units. Let's go back to the numbers I shared with you before, right? 1,027 multi-unit flips, 1,800 STRs. What we're saying is that 18% conservatively of all of our rental stock in Ulster County has been flipped or STR'd in the last 3 years. That's crazy. That is nuts. I know we're feeling it, but let's look at the real number here. 18%. It's probably higher because multi-unit flips, I'm only thinking of the biggest, the Dutch villages, the Stony Runs. I mean, I'm sure there's flips that we haven't even thought about. So I want to raise a couple of issues before I go and turn it over to other people. I think it's really important to think about, what does area median income mean when your community is turning into New Brooklyn and Kerhampton? Okay, people are moving in here with high incomes. What is that going to mean for AMI? Because a lot of the programs that we use, a lot of the housing programs that we use, you know, are based on a percentage of area median income. Well, if area median income goes up and you're, you know, making minimum wage, you are going to be really struggling. And the amount at which we consider to be low income is going to be at a different level. So we really need to think about that and think about maybe needing like a super affordable category for regular people. We need all sectors of government to work, okay? Village, town, county, state, national. It's got to be a full court press. The problems we're experiencing here, the people sleeping in Onteora Park here or park and rides here, that is all over. That is California. That is not just a New York problem. So this is a national problem, but we need to make changes at every level, and we need to have government and nonprofit and for-profits working together. You know, I think we should be thinking about a housing emergency. I was very interested to see that the CGR report that, you know, did not find sufficient minimum vacancy to drive, you know, the tenant protection legislation in Kingston, did note that we have a housing crisis. I'm like, oh, okay, the numbers are there for something. We need to be looking at so many different things, from changing our zoning to allow multifamily, to allow accessory uses, to allow, you know, minimum lot size, you know, 2 acres, 5 acres, 1 acre. Why are we going so big? Restricting short-term rental usage. You're seeing a number of our municipalities do this. They're going to cap it. They have to. There's literally nowhere left for people to live. And discourage flipping. I want to say something about this because there is a bill, there is a resolution that's been kicking around the legislature. My office released a report last year on mortgage recording tax and real estate transfer tax. And as a result of that, there have been a couple of resolutions where people are talking about real estate transfer tax. Look, nobody wants new taxes. I get it. But there is a big difference between somebody who's held their house for 10 years selling to retire or downsize, or a family whose kids aged out and wants to downsize. There's a big difference between that person and E&M management coming in here and basically raping us. Okay, I'm sorry to use crass language, but they put money in, they buy the property, they do very little reno or fit up, and they're selling at a huge price inflation. That, why are we not taxing that? I'm not clear on that. You know what I'm saying? Maybe the taxation could be used as a way to really drive policy here for that reason. So I think we need to think about that. And then obviously all new construction of multiple units has to have affordable housing. We need to be thinking outside the box for home ownership opportunities, cooperative ownership opportunities, things we've probably never thought about before, even structures I'm saying that we haven't even really embraced up to this point. And then everyone needs to show up for housing. And we say this, but do you do it? Do we do it? We did a lot of say no. I was asked as an attorney, I'm a zoning and planning attorney, I was asked to represent families opposing the Rupco project in Woodstock. And I was like, in my opinion, at that point, it was like 80 units proposed. And I said, in my opinion, a win would be like having the number of units to 40. And the person who was trying to hire me said, I don't want that. I want to stop the project. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. Like, find somebody else. We have to show up. That's not enough. We now have to go to planning board meetings, to zoning board meetings, to comp plan meetings, and say, I want affordable housing. I want Landmark Place. I want Energy Square. And stop using the language of opponents. If they are using words that we do not like, that is not the name of that property. That is not the name. We need to use the language we want, okay? That is housing, that is Landmark Place. We have to go, we have to start saying that. So I think it's really important that we do that, that we start showing up for housing. This is my contact information. I'm sure like the organizers here are going to make it, you know, available after this. I want you to know that this is a really important issue for the county. I know the county executive and the legislature are really dedicated to focusing on this. Like, they've heard it loud and clear. I think you can see right now that we are 3 years past the problem. When you see those numbers, the dates on those flips of 2018, you realize we are coming to this too late. So now we really are in an emergency. So anyway, I really appreciate you guys taking the time. I really appreciate people sharing their stories. I know there are thousands more stories out there. And I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation. And I plan to continue to work on this. I am really upset about Chiz's Hart Street. That is something that is weighing on me tremendously right now. So thank you guys. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to hearing the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, March. We are going to talk about Chiz's Hart Street a little bit out later, but that is something that is concerning so many in our community right now, that 69 people could be homeless when they have a place to stay right now. I do want to pull out a point that you raised that I think was so important, that we have to get to the place where we are comfortable thinking outside of the box. And I think that is so important. And then, of course, what you've raised about housing being commodified instead of being treated like a human right, like it should be. Thank you, March. Thank you so much. And so we wanted to also include narratives from those who don't necessarily get a chance to have a moment at the mic, or are maybe too afraid to come forward to speak about how housing is impacting them. We are fortunate to be joined tonight by Aline Martinez. She's a caseworker with Catholic Charities, and she's going to be speaking to us about how the housing crisis is impacting the undocumented community. Thank you, Aline.
Thank you, Rashida. Hi, everyone, and I'm excited to be here tonight. I'll be talking briefly about how the housing crisis is affecting undocumented members of our community. Again, my name is Elena Martinez. I work for Catholic Charities, and part of the work that we do is to help out families and individuals with their rent, utility, or food. This topic is near and dear to my heart because I've talked and listened to so many families about their struggle to pay for rent in all the time that I've been with charities. We all know that the housing situation was already problematic before the COVID, before the pandemic. So when COVID happened, it affected everyone at so many different levels, but I'm invited to talk about specifically about undocumented individuals. And I want to refer to COVID and how COVID was devastating for the undocumented immigrants, especially because of the job loss. With businesses closing, most of them lost their primary source of income, and this led to an inability to pay rent, utilities, and also food insecurity. Now, most immigrants do not qualify for government assistance, stimulus checks, or are scared to access benefits even if they might qualify for them. People feared applying for benefits because of the rules that we had in the past, these years, up until recently, pertaining to public charge. For example, and then talking from my own experience, when somebody is trying to adjust their status in the country, we don't want to do anything that might harm that case that we have pending with immigration, because trying to adjust the status here, it costs money and it takes a lot of time. So we saw families that even if they qualified for food stamps and they needed the food, they were afraid to applying for it because they didn't want to be considered a public charge and potentially damage their chances to adjust their status. Public charge rules have gotten better, so that's good news. I'm going to read something from from the Director of Immigration and Refugee Services of Catholic Charities. It says, about half of clients who are eligible for unemployment insurance have managed to receive it. Multiple barriers are at play, including fear both of public charge and potentially being outed to government officials as undocumented by seeking benefits, as well as lack of information about government programs and not knowing how to navigate access to benefits. So limited language and technology access are big barriers for immigrants. A little bit about the eviction moratorium. Although the eviction moratorium protects tenants from being evicted until as of now, undocumented members of our community are deeply afraid of the court system. Some of them don't know how it works, how that system works, and they were and are still afraid of being evicted. And some even doubted that they were protected by this law. Something that I hear very often from my clients when I'm telling them which resources or help is available to them is the first thing is, no, I don't qualify. This law doesn't apply, doesn't protect me. I can't access that because of my status. And perhaps this assumption is linked to the fact that many immigrants struggle to get up-to-date, accurate information in their language about their rights in general and during the pandemic, and this led to fear and misinformation. Another side of the housing crisis is our overcrowded households. For the immigrant community, the problem perhaps is less of homelessness and a little bit more of crowded households in poor living substandard conditions. We know of 2, 3 more families sharing one house, and by sharing their rent is how they can pay for it. there are some safety concerns when we talk about crowded households in like regular circumstances. But now with the pandemic, where we are advised to practice social distancing, well, that's hard. It's more difficult when you live in a crowded house. Well, we've heard and said that part of the crisis is limited options that are available. Well, for undocumented individuals with or without pandemic, there's always been even fewer options. If they're in the process of finding housing, and if they need to provide bank statements, pay stubs, credit score, they might not be able to provide any of these. So their options are even fewer. In conclusion, when we look at the housing crisis for undocumented individuals, we're not only talking about the physical space between four walls and if it's affordable, but also looking at their struggles to settle in and be part of this country. And that's my struggle too, as we try to grow roots here. We are habitants of our house, just as we are habitants of the world. Personally, I hope that the actions taken to address the housing situation will take in consideration the needs and the hopes of all of the members of our community. I think that we all have the same hopes when it comes to housing. We want to live in a place that's safe, that's affordable, and comfortable to live in. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you. And Rashida, mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Aline. I just want to raise up and lift up something that you said that I think really resonated and should resonate with a lot of people, which is that those who are in the undocumented community don't feel protected. And that the systems that we go to and we run to for protection and for help are the ones that they feel most unsafe around. And so thank you so much for highlighting that and for bringing about that perspective. And so I want to also to raise up the fact that we have again a great panel here tonight, speakers who are from the county government and who have again been paying very much attention to this and have been working with the community to try to find ways to actually overcome the housing crisis. So we're going to bring on next Evelyn Wright. She is the Deputy County Executive. I know she is also an economist. And again, someone who is working every day on some of the problems at the forefront of the housing crisis here in Ulster County. So I would love to turn it over to Deputy County Executive Evelyn Wright.
Thanks, Rashida. Thank you so much to all the organizers and everyone in the coalition. This is really a wonderful event. I've learned so much from listening to all the speakers, and really applaud everybody who put this panel together and all the organizing that you're doing. It's so vital. And I appreciate March's introduction to some of the data. I think we've got a good complement to each other here on the data side. So I'm gonna put my screen up. I'm gonna try to be fairly brief. I know we want to get to question and answer. I want to just share, and March mentioned this, we just released the Housing Action Plan a couple weeks ago. Our goal there was really to look at the data on housing issues in Ulster County and then really get to looking at strategies for how we could respond. So I would say that the the plan is about half and half. The document's about half and half data and strategies. We worked with a really tremendous committee of 9 individuals from around the county who really gave us input from a whole lot of different perspectives. They were just an absolutely hardworking and fantastic group, and worked with Pattern for Progress to put the report together. And our goal in doing this study was really to help facilitate a community-wide conversation about how we can work together to address the housing crisis. So the plan has just come out, but the work is really just starting now. And so I'm so grateful to be here with you having this conversation. So I was asked tonight to talk about what we need, how we target what we need, and what kinds of things we can do, and what are the stakes if we don't do it. And so I want to try to talk a little bit about each of those things. First, I want to talk about what do we mean by affordable, and March alluded to this. The sort of typical definition of affordability for households is that you spend less than 30% of your income on housing costs. So that means not just your rent or your mortgage payment, but also your energy costs, also your insurance, everything that's associated with your housing. They call it unaffordable when you're spending somewhere between 30 and 50%, and severely cost burdened if you're spending more than 50% of your income on housing. And at that point, when you're severely cost burdened, you're just so vulnerable to any kind of unforeseen expense, unforeseen interruption in your income, medical bills, that they can really throw a household into interrupting school, interrupting work, and sometimes even homelessness. So when we get to that severely cost burdened, it's really just an unsustainable situation. And so, this is what our data shows countywide, that countywide, only 62% of our households are living in affordable homes. And that's really different depending on whether you're owning or renting. So it's up around 70% that are affordable if you own, and less than half if you're renting. And the proportion of folks who are severely cost burdened is 14% for owners. So even folks who own their own homes, there are folks who are severely cost burdened, but it's nearly 30% of renters. So this is a really unacceptably high fraction of our population that is just living in, constant dread of what the unexpected is going to be. And of course, this is very skewed by income. Folks who have lower incomes are more likely to be in severely cost burdened homes. It's also very skewed by race. And so we see that much higher levels of severe cost burden among Black and Latino households. So what do we need? We need housing of many different kinds. And I want to talk a little bit about housing, types of housing and housing definition. It seems like every few years somebody's trying to come up with a new terminology for homes that are affordable to people who are not making high incomes, in order to try to get away from the stigma of whatever the last term that was in vogue was. So affordable housing was originally invented as a term that was supposed to sound better than low income housing. And now we all think that, oh, that term has stigma, we've got to get away from it. The fact of the matter is we need housing for everybody. We need housing for folks who have low incomes. We need housing for folks who have middle incomes. There's this term out there called workforce housing, which I think is kind of a problematic term, but it's often meant to refer to, somewhere in between low and middle income. We need housing for seniors. We have a lot of folks who want to age in place in their communities, but not remain in their single family homes that may be too large for them or too far out of town. They want to be in something smaller, something that requires less maintenance, something that's more walkable. And the fact that they can't find somewhere to move that suits them means that the home that they're in now is locked up. And that home might be more appropriate for a young family. So we absolutely in this county need more emergency housing for folks who are experiencing sudden homelessness. And we need supportive and transitional housing to provide support to folks who are struggling with mental health issues, with substance abuse, or who are transitioning out of homelessness. So it's just a very wide set of types of housing that we need. I want to say a little bit about income, and March alluded to this because this is an issue that comes up over and over again. Median income, which means that the household of the income of the household that is right in the middle of the income distribution. So it's similar to average income, but not exactly the same. We can think of it as what the most typical household there is making. Across the county, the median is around $63,000. And this is what gets called area median income. Our area is Ulster County for these statistics. But what this map shows you is that median income varies a great deal across the county, just about twofold, between some areas where it's closer to 40,000 and some where it's closer to 80,000. And in particular, in Kingston, the median income is less than $50,000. So that's 76% of area median income, of the Ulster County income. And so when we start talking about housing that's affordable at 80% of median income or 60% of median income, we got to be really clear whose median we're talking about. The federal definitions and the state policies, they're always going to refer to this area median income, which is not going to be affordable based on Kingston standards in many cases. So it's something to be really clear about. So as we looked at what's driving affordability and unaffordability in the county, March talked a lot about income. That's a huge part of the story. What we looked at in the Housing Action Plan was really the other side of the problem, which is the supply crisis. March talked a lot about how homes have been essentially taken out of the affordable market by short-term rentals and flipping. That's an important piece of it. Another driver of it is that we have built very little in Ulster County in the last few decades. And what we have built has tended to be on the very high end of the market. So new homes have been averaging $500,000 purchase price or more. That's partly because in many parts of the county, we require them to be built on large lots. And it's partly because when developers are building housing, they can just make more profit on a larger and more expensive home. And so that's what they go for. So we have what we're calling in the report, the missing middle. We lack housing for literally everyone except at the very high end of the market at this point. It's partly that the cost of development has gone up and all of the inputs, land, labor, raw materials. We also have limited areas that have water and sewer infrastructure in the county. But another contributing factor is that it takes a long time to get a project of any size approved. And it can be very uncertain. I've been telling a story about, there's a very kind of weedy, woodsy lot right around the corner from my house here in Midtown. And last summer, a developer wanted to build about 15 apartments on it. And I thought, great, somebody's going to finally do something with that mess. And before I even knew it was going on, my neighbors had already been to the city council to complain about it and say, oh, we don't want trash cans out in the street or some ridiculous thing like that. And the project was killed. And that's part of what's become our story around constructing housing. And so I want to absolutely echo what March said, that those of us who care about this issue actually need to be at those meetings and need to be saying, yes, we need this, because as long as the only people who are motivated to show up are the people who don't like one specific project, we're just going to keep having these one-off fights about particular projects and never get what we need. So I want to talk a little bit about different ways that we can increase supply. The way that we tend to think of is to build big projects and to look for sites where we can do that. When we started working on the Housing Action Plan at the county, we wanted to also take immediate concrete steps, not just sit around and study it. And we designated the site of the old jail on top of Golden Hill that has been sitting there doing nothing for nearly a decade as a place where we could build housing. And so I'm happy to let you know that just in the last week, the Housing Development Corporation that's working on this project got to the place where we have an agreement now with the developer that we've picked to build this project. And so I know you haven't been hearing a lot about this project yet because we were still working out the contractual details with them, but they are just about ready to start doing community engagement this spring. And so we put out these drawings from their architect that were part of their proposal that are the concept plan for 160 units of very mixed income housing, half for seniors, across a range of incomes from 30 to 130% of that county AMI is what we've been talking about. But this is a concept plan, and it's going to be going in front of the community to get input about what people need and what people want. So you'll be hearing more about that this spring. This is only one way to do it, to find places to build large projects, and it's not the easiest way, and it's not necessarily the best way. And if that's all we do, we're not going to get there. So we need to figure out how to make our existing housing stock and our existing neighborhoods work harder. This graphic is courtesy of Councilmember Michelle Hirsch, who has just introduced some legislation to make it easier to build accessory dwelling units within the city of Kingston, where right now they require a special permit and they're fairly highly restricted. An accessory dwelling unit is an extra apartment that has kitchen and plumbing facilities that is built on an existing lot. It can be attached to the home, it can be an apartment above a garage, it can be a basement apartment, but it's a way of being able to nimbly increase density within the neighborhoods we already have. And we can imagine, and I know folks in the community have been imagining ways to help homeowners finance the construction of accessory dwelling units in exchange for some rent guarantees on those properties. I think that's a really great idea. Another approach that I really got introduced to when we were working on selecting a developer for Golden Hill, we visited a project by one of the proposers up in Schenectady. This is the Hamilton Hill neighborhood in Schenectady. And they were, oh dear, my text has fallen off the screen. This is an example of a scattered site project, was what they call it. You can see that this neighborhood is pretty mixed. There's a number of streets that have homes that look a lot like the homes in Kingston. And then there's a handful of mid-rises and high-rises and larger commercial buildings. And so what this developer did was they worked with the city and the Schenectady Land Bank and pieced together about 30 different parcels that included a couple of old schools that were no longer in use that they rehabilitated into housing. But then the land bank also had, it was a street similar to this one. I don't think it's this one that you can see on the screen here, but a similar street with a bunch of homes. Some were vacant lots, some were homes in tremendous disrepair. A few of them were repairable. And what they did was they renovated the schools into apartments, but then they built new homes on the street that fit in architecturally with the neighborhood, but designed as duplexes and 3 apartment buildings. And we were just really impressed. I mean, it was a real labor of love to put together all of those parcels into one big project, but it really meant that they could add a lot more units and not radically change what the street looked like. Some other things that we need to do, there's a lot of zoning and regulatory issues that make it harder to increase housing supply. We need to take a look at those. Those are all at the municipal level, Kingston, Hurley, Woodstock. One of the things that I'm doing now is going and speaking in front of town boards to talk about all of the different kinds of zoning and policy changes that we can make, because we're going to have to do this community by community. We're really encouraging communities to streamline the approval process and make it more transparent. We'd like to see communities put up on the community website, here's how you get a project approved in our community. These are the steps in the process. this is what we're looking for, and this is what we're not looking for. And if you can follow these steps and meet these criteria, then you can know that your project will get approved in a reasonable period of time. That would allow lowering the soft costs of development to make it easier to get things built. We also need to just proactively identify sites for new development rather than sitting around and waiting for a developer to come and propose something that they think is a good idea. Every community can take a hard look at what do we need, what are the different kinds of housing we need, and where does it make sense for us to build that? What are the ways, what are the parts of our community that we want to make sure we preserve? What are the parts of our community where it makes sense to build more? And then actively go out and seek developers to build the projects that the community wants. But most importantly, we really need to educate and engage the community on how important this is and the crucial role that housing plays, not just in the well-being of individual families and individual neighbors, but in the fabric of our community as a whole. This is an economic issue. This is a public health issue. If we don't tackle this crisis, we're going to see our community change in ways that are going to be inexorable as folks are forced out. We were told by several of the largest employers in the county, they're struggling to find workers and to retain workers because folks can't afford to live here. And that's going to become a change that is going to be very difficult to reverse, not only for the individuals that are displaced, but for the community as a whole. So again, I really appreciate and applaud the work the coalition is doing, and the 200 people who have turned out on a Friday night to come and be part of this conversation, because this is absolutely what we need to do.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. And I love raising up a point from each speaker. I think what resonated the most was something that I really want people to understand, that workforce housing is not affordable housing. It's not necessarily affordable. And that's something where we need housing at every different level, every different spectrum within, within our community, so that everybody has a house. But we have to also make sure that we're specifically looking at where the need is. And again, with workforce housing, that's necessary, and affordable housing is as well. Thank you so much. So I have a brief presentation. The Ulster County Coalition for Housing Justice, we started working last May, and we have a list of demands. We've been working on things such as trying to find a better way to define the AMI, or an income level to adjust for rent. So we do have some demands, and you can read these more on our website. I'm just going to switch over, if I can share my screen. So here. Awesome. So our demands are to declare a universal eviction moratorium applicable to all stages of eviction through the duration of the public health emergency, to keep renters safely in their homes. Studies show in states where the eviction moratorium has been lifted, those who die from COVID are 3 to 4 times higher than in states that have not lifted the eviction moratorium. Cancel all rent and mortgage payments for tenants, small businesses, and homeowners experiencing economic hardship through the duration of the public health emergency. This does not mean that landlords will not get compensation. This means that the state and federal resources will compensate the landlords and the tenants who will not be the ones who are responsible for that background. Immediately conduct a Kingston City vacancy study and pass rent control in line with the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. Last year, Mayor Noble said that the study, he would use the buildings department to do its own study. We have not heard an update on that. We would like to hear an update on that. We believe there are multiple methodologies that are out there that will allow, again, a comprehensive study of the vacancy in Kingston. And we would like that to be returned to. Clearly, we cannot keep swimming in a river that has a tide against us, because the rents are increasing just as fast as we're coming up with solutions to keep people in-house. Immediately, again, to commit to updating zoning laws and ordinances in collaboration with community stakeholders, including the Ulster County Coalition for Housing Justice. Again, the conversations about rezoning have to start with the community. And I really like Evelyn's point about, where to develop affordable housing, where to develop housing, and how our community should develop. We should be integral in those discussions. Agree to a countywide definition of affordable housing that is tied to the average hourly wage of renters in the county rather than the area median income. And this is a way, again, of keeping the definition of affordable housing truly affordable. And to ensure that at least 25% of all Ulster County housing meets the definitions of above of affordable housing, and prevent displacement and quickly rehouse rent-burdened or homeless individuals through legislation and/or supplemental policies, including immediately greenlighting the use of the vacant lot at 615 Broadway to build tiny homes in order to provide housing for at least 30 individuals. We've quickly found out that zoning laws seem to exist when we want to develop for the poor and for homeless, but when hotels want to build cabins that are actually tiny homes, the zoning laws seem to magically disappear or become very malleable. To utilize a proportion of incoming stimulus funds to purchase Chis's Hart Street boarding house, which is being forced to close as of May 2021 due to its commercial sale. They can follow the model of the Patriots Project on Wirt Street, which can be publicly owned but is privately operated by a nonprofit. So this model already exists within our county structure. We just have to have, again, our county and city officials being willing to utilize some of those stimulus funds to rescue, again, the 69 people who are in danger of losing their homes in May. And again, to work with the Kingston Land Trust or other organizations to purchase current homes for sale in order to create affordable housing, transfer ownership of vacant city-owned properties for immediate renovation and/or building of affordable housing. We have lots of vacant properties here in Kingston that are not being utilized, and we have a homelessness problem. We shouldn't have that. There should not be a surplus of one when there's a surplus of the other. Provide funding and support, including necessary zoning allowances for the accessory dwelling unit program that enables community members to transform carriage houses and other structures on their property into affordable housing. And incentivize landlords by offering tax abatements to those who offer rents that conform to the aforementioned definition of affordable housing, make improvements to dwellings while maintaining the affordable housing status, and transform short-term rentals into affordable housing. Again, we understand there's a difference between renting out a room occasionally to make extra money and augment your income versus the systematic way short-term rentals are being utilized to actually displace and divorce people from our community. So you can get involved. We have the Ulster County Coalition for Housing Justice website, which is ucchj.squarespace.com. You can also attend some of the upcoming forums we're going to have. We're actually going to have a forum specifically on tiny homes, and then one on zoning, and then one on going from NIMBY to YIMBY, and then on specifically fighting gentrification. So stay tuned, sign up, go to the website, go to our Facebook page, go to our Instagram. You can also talk to your friends and neighbors about the housing crisis to get involved. And you can also email us at uchousingjustice@gmail.com. So that is my very, very brief, my very brief presentation that I sped up because I do want to have some time for questions. And Kwame, if you want to, if there are any questions, direct it to either the panelists or individual panelists or the entire panel, please ask away.
Hi, thanks everyone and to our panelists for all that incredible information. I've been collecting questions from the chat and I just wanted to start with one what I think speaks to a general need. My husband and I have received a 60-day notice from my landlord. I'm on REPCO. They will begin an eviction at the end of the moratorium. I am current on my rent and a good tenant. They want to sell the property. I cannot find affordable housing anywhere. We live in Bearsville, please help. And I just wonder if anyone on the panel can help these folks to make their next steps. If they're still on the call or if anyone on the call is in a similar situation, panelists, what should these folks do?
Right, the very first thing I always advise anyone who receives a notice is to talk to Legal Services of the Hudson Valley. We have their links again on our website. We also have, you know, some of the pamphlets that they give out on the new housing law on the website as well. One of the things that we're advising people to do is to try to also negotiate with the landlord because right now, again, basically there's not a lot of you're not really supposed to be moving. You know, May 1st is going to be when eviction courts start hearing cases where, you know, there has been, you know, an eviction order or the people want to evict. But sometimes, again, landlords, they're people too, and you have to try to see where you can come to an agreement. If it's a matter of money or back rent, which the person said that they were current, so I'm guessing it's not that, find out what the issue is. If they just want to kick people out and raise rents, which is what we're finding, we also have the Hudson Valley Eviction Defense team, which we're more than happy to speak about as well. Again, that's a little bit more of a tactic that when landlords, again, are not necessarily compliant and they're really wanting just to gentrify, that we can utilize. So if you want, you can email us at uchousingjustice@gmail.com and we can talk more.
All right, there's been a number of questions. Thank you, Rashida. There's been a number of questions in the chat about Chiz's Heart. And about the news that it's being sold and that the residents are facing eviction and homelessness. How can we get involved to prevent people from becoming displaced?
I wish I had an answer to that. I don't right now. And I've been following some conversations online saying that a sale has already happened. I was searching the real property records today. I can't see that. So I'm gonna have to do more research and follow up with the people that said that it had been sold already. But it does seem imminent. And I agree with people that, you know, just saying we're gonna find places for these people is not sufficient. At the same time, we all know that it's not in good repair and that Chiz herself has, you know, had her own struggles. But losing this vital resource seems like a tremendous crisis. I can't imagine that it's going to go well to have, you know, 70 people who need extra support on the street or, you know, looking for housing that's already full. So it's a huge crisis. I just became aware of it a few days ago. I mean, there is a GoFundMe. I don't know, you know, kind of where that'll go. And it had a low limit of 15 grand, which is not anywhere near where it needs to be. I worked with Diane Reeder when she was there running it as Queen's Galley. And the struggle was that it's taxed the way a normal home of normal property is. It's not treated as a nonprofit, which it should be. Queen's Galley was a nonprofit operating there. I don't know if Chiz's is a nonprofit, but it is basically providing, right, a nonprofit service, and we're taxing the heck out of that property. So we really need a different structure for that whole thing. And I don't know if we're going to come up with a solution in a timely way. Others may have something to add. Thanks. I suggested standing on the street with signs, because what happened was I went to the Cahoots workshop last night, and I was in a breakout room, and I said to the people in my breakout, like, I'm so upset about Chiz's, I just feel like crying about it. And they were like, what's with Chiz's? And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? So I told me that there's a huge community that has no idea what's happening. People who might be supportive, people who might write out checks, people who might, take action, just don't know right now. So anyway.
Thank you so much, March. Rashida, did you want to add something?
Well, I'm all about piercing the veil of anonymity. And when you look at LLCs, that's what an LLC allows anonymity in a housing situation. Number one, I don't actually believe that the LLC should protect the identity of the owner of the property. Like, everyone should know that. We had people who were trying to figure out who the owner exactly was. My building was taken over by an LLC. I had to track them down through the Department of State to find out who they were. You should know who owns your building. You should know who to hold accountable for when things start to go wrong. And I kind of, again, I like your idea, March, about standing out in the corner, but not necessarily in front of Chiz's Hart Street. I want to know where the landlord or the person who owns the building lives, so that we can stand out there in the appropriate place. So if they don't like their actions coming to light, maybe they should not be taking those actions. So I have strong feelings on that. The other is, again, we need for Mayor Noble and for Pat Ryan to start looking at the possibility of doing a Patriots Project type agreement around this parcel. This is something, again, that's totally within the public interest of preventing displacement. And that's something Kingston just received a grant for. So if we're going to be truly about what we're saying we're about, then we need to be proactive.
Thank you so much.
I'll just add, Kwame, my understanding is that at least some of the residents have gotten notices saying that they need to be out by May 1st. And my understanding is that that's not legally accurate. And that's what we've been working on, is trying to clear up what that process is, and absolutely get everybody who lives there connected to legal aid to make sure that there's no intimidation and false information being given out.
Thank you, Evelyn. I also want to just reassure everyone in the chat that this meeting is being recorded, and I think our panelists are willing to stay on a bit longer so we can ask questions. They'll get answered. If you have to run, maybe there's a Netflix moment you want to be a part of, you can watch the recording later, and the information will be here for you. One of the most common questions that we saw in the chat is, how do we stop rent from increasing? How do we stop landlords from increasing rent? And so there was some mention of the ETPA, and I just wondered if our panelists could explain that in more detail for people who are not familiar.
I was going to say, do you want, because I know March, yeah, so you can go ahead.
I'll say what I know, and I think you know more, so I'll start and then you can continue. But the EPTA requires municipalities to demonstrate a certain level of a certain minute level of vacancy, which is under, I think, 5%, to be able to enact the legislation. The municipality, hires a consultant to articulate what the vacancy rate is. A lot of that is self-reported. So there is a big incentive especially from larger landlords to, sort of hold off in reporting back. And you can actually see, some of the properties in the report by CGR who did not respond. And they may not, I think, there's some uncertainty about whether or not those responses that did come in really were legitimate. I don't want to disparage anyone, but the idea that we have a certain amount of vacancies at some of the complexes, and I do urge you guys to look at the CGR report. There's a link in my study, in my PowerPoint, which we'll share out later, where you look at it and you're going, I really don't think so, right? Maybe we have to take to the street and actually knock on every door. I mean, because the landlord can say one thing, but my question is somebody living in there? Okay, don't tell me it's vacant if there is somebody in there. But it would provide some level of protection only for properties that have over 6 units. Is that right? Only 6 units or more. So it does not stop the person in Bearsville, the couple in Bearsville, if it's just a 1-unit property. That's a different issue. And I think we have a much bigger problem on our hands. Again, it comes down to, we have a wealth problem, we have a wealth inequity problem. And one of the things I like to say is some people need to have less, and probably none of those people are golfing at Wilwick, because people get really upset when you start to say some people need to have less. They're like, wait, what? And I'm like, you don't even understand. We're talking about people with a B after name, a billionaire. But this would solve a problem in high density areas with with properties over 6 units, if we can demonstrate that we have a low vacancy rate. Rashida, I'm sure I left a few things out here.
No, actually, you did a great job. You covered basically the basics of the ETPA. One of the things is, again, circling back to the whole numbers aren't necessarily revealing of all. So the data, it's how you define vacancy. So the report, it looked at only apartments actually that were like 20 units or above. So because in Kingston, the city of Kingston, we actually don't have that many complexes. So it only was looking at those complexes, and then it's stratified between subsidized and non-subsidized complexes. And so one of the things that happened in Ossining is, again, the company, the way it defined vacancy was the problem. So that's why I think that the public, we need to focus on the methodology that is used to define vacancy, so that it's comprehensive, including apartments that may be, again, the landlord has withheld from the market intentionally. Again, these are things that we have to do it ongoing as well. So that's why it was so exciting when the mayor said he was going to have the building to be habitable. And that's something, again, that I think we could do, easily within a year or so, probably even less. And if they engage community groups and train people in the community to do it, it could get done a lot faster.
Thank you so much, Rashida. One of the questions that has come into the chat is, how quickly after one receives a notice of eviction can a landlord basically force a person out? And I know that that's a question which has many answers, but if you could just offer a few the rules or the processes, so that people can know how much time they have if they receive a eviction notice.
So right now we have an eviction moratorium. So really you shouldn't be looking at anything before May 1st. But generally, in probably non-COVID times and also now, if you've been living in a property for under 1 year, you get 30 days notice. If you've been living there between 1 and 2 years, you get 60 days notice. If you've been living there 3 years or more, it's 90 days notice. And that also applies to if your lease is not being renewed and if your rent is being increased.
Thank you so much. There was a request in the chat for what are some immediate action items that people can take now? And I know that's something that we did come up with as a group. And I wonder, can we share some of those action items now for people who are wanting to get involved right away?
So definitely go to the website and sign the petition. If someone can drop the link to the website in the chat, that is definitely something right now that you can do.
Another question. Look, there's quite a bit of interest in CHIZ, and the chat has spoken, and they are declaring that we have not spent enough time developing an action plan around CHIZ. And I think as a member of the coalition, my first response to that would simply be, it's a long-term thing and it won't be happening all tonight. Please get involved in the long term. But panelists, can you help us to think through CHIZ?
It's hard to have a plan when you only learned about it 2 days ago. So I would just say, like, you know, people need a minute. I know we don't have a minute, and I agree with you. Like, we do need a bigger plan, but I know for me, like, I just learned about this yesterday. So it's going to take some time to think of what should happen next. Again, I do feel like standing on the street, that was my first instinct, was like, I want to go stand in front of CHIZ's on Monday night at rush hour with huge signs to say something, because a lot of people don't know. You know, let's write letters to the editor, let's blast it out more on social media, but people in the community really don't know. So not part of
sorry, March. So I'm not going to say this is a plan. This is just me thinking through what I would do if I was in this situation. So very first thing, each resident, again, is someone who has a right as a tenant. So they can, again, go to Legal Services of the Hudson Valley, and they can, again, force that day in court. Again, I'm not giving away too much strategy. The key is make their pockets hurt. So each person has the ability to go to court. Depending upon the length of time they've been living there, their window of notice is different. So again, if someone's been there 3 years, they need that 90 days of notice. And what the landlord just gave to them, they have to bring that to Legal Services of Hudson Valley to see if that notice is even legal. Because again, we're in an eviction moratorium. So a lot of times the 30, 60, and 90 days does not start to chime until you reach May 1st. There are some exceptions where landlords are allowed to bring cases starting March 1st, which is why we saw the 200 cases that were being brought in Albany County. Those are typically the eviction orders and lawsuits that happened before the eviction moratorium was declared. So that's why you see this backlog. Again, every tenant should consult with an attorney, should understand the timetable that they have, and then they can also do something such as insisting on a buyout. So if the landlord wants them to move, every single person there, 69, should insist on a buyout. And again, this is the make their pockets hurt strategy, because it's going to almost be cheaper to keep her. And so that's kind of one method that you can utilize. The other method is, of course, negotiation. So direct negotiations with the new landlord to stay in the building. Again, these are not, well thought out strategies right now. These are just kind of ideas off the top of my head that I know have worked for tenants in the past. And you can employ a whole method of strategies leading up to and including, again, protesting the new owner of the building if they're seeking to evict. So again, this is a conversation that I think we should continue. The Ulster County Coalition for Housing Justice, you can head to our website. You can get in touch with us via email. And I do know that there are conversations that are happening right now or in the next few weeks that will, I think, shed more light. So I don't think, unfortunately, that if people came here for that concrete answer, I'm very sorry. It's something that will evolve over time, but I think that there will be a community response. We cannot keep having people be displaced. We've had the 2 fires at the other boarding homes, Elizabeth Manor and another one on Green Street, and then this CHIZ's house. So people are slowly being pushed out and forced out of Kingston, and we have to take a stand.
Thank you. So maybe we'll agree to close at 9. Is that fair? There was a really helpful comment about CHIZ from Renee in the chat, which I just want to read in case anyone missed it. I talked to Mary Chisholm just before our meeting the buildings are under contract. She has been told by her board that she has to have the residents out of the building by the end of May. She is clear that given COVID, evictions will not happen quickly. They will become court cases. But Mary Shiz is exhausted. If we want to keep this housing and these neighbors with us, we will have to fight for them. That's more of a comment than a question. So I'm going to go on to the next question I received, which is, what about housing for halfway housing for people who are transitioning out of incarceration, who are suffering from opioid addiction and alcoholism and severe mental illness? Are there any plans for building housing for those constituencies in the county?
This is so crucial. We have such a dire need for all those types of housing. And this is where we absolutely need the community to come out and demand it. Like I said, it was impossible to site an ordinary apartment building in my neighborhood. It's even harder to site housing to support populations of folks who are struggling with various things. And so we have to, as a community, determine this is what we need. Let us get out the maps and take a look and figure out where it makes sense. And as a common council, as a town board, determine this is how many units we need to build, and this is where we're going to do it. Identify the properties and put out a request for qualifications to developers and say, we want this, build this here. That is the way it's going to get done. It's not going to get done by waiting for a developer to come and propose it and go through the fights to site it, because we have just made it so difficult to get anything built here through the way we do the process that we have to get together and do it proactively.
It also means that when one of these things is proposed, we need to get up and go.
Yeah.
Go to Ellenville, go to Plattekill, go to Woodstock, go to Saugerties, wherever it is, because the one or two people that might be in support of something are not enough. We have to start acting as a pack and really start speaking in every community.
Yeah.
Rupco, Woodstock identified property. They wanted affordable housing, invited Rupco in, and it still took 9 years of litigation to get the project done.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah, can we please type your questions into the chat? We had a question about the stimulus and how will stimulus funds be used potentially for affordable housing, and then how can we help to pressure, or rather support, our elected officials to make sure that stimulus money is used to help people find a place to live?
Can I jump in first, Evelyn, to say, I think this should be taken out of stimulus. I mean, stimulus is to solve some revenue and public health problems that are happening right now. And this is a problem right now, but I think we need to change the way we look at housing and say housing is infrastructure. We need a big infrastructure bill that goes way beyond stimulus, that's not stimulus. I'm not saying we're not going to do something with stimulus, but we used to have a lot more federal dollars invested in actually building housing, and housing is infrastructure. So I think we have to change the conversation a little bit and say, like, housing is infrastructure. We want an infrastructure bill. Infrastructure week is coming, and this stimulus is not going to be enough. I can tell you right now, it's not enough. Even if Ulster County used 100% of its stimulus, it would build one complex the size of Energy Square. That is not going to solve our problem. We need something much bigger. We need something much bigger.
Well, I wonder if our other panelists, who might not feel that they're supposed to answer these questions, but probably have things to say, can that would be Aline or Marissa or Diana. Do y'all have thoughts about the stimulus and housing?
Actually, I do. I actually had not a question, but more of a inquisitive comment for March or Evelyn. A few years ago, I worked with a group that bought abandoned properties and converted them into affordable housing, and the state quickly caught wind, came in and shut us down. Because they're not profitable. I mean, affordable housing simply is not profitable. That's the issue with New York State. My question is, or maybe my comment, I'm not sure. What can we do with so many abandoned properties. Like I said, I work for the state. I close, my class closed Wassaic, and there's 28 buildings sitting up there that could self-sustained house 500-600 homeless people. 600 homeless people. That's just in Dover Plains alone. Think about Letchworth Village, and they knocked down Harlem Valley for a ShopRite. What can we do besides getting rid of an overzealous governor? What can we do as a community to come in and not have to spend $100 million to buy a property? But what can we do with these abandoned properties to actually make it affordable and give those drug rehab centers and the homeless shelters to people that really need it? Restore the mental health services that were taken, that were defunded. How can we get back to that, where the community can support a large range of people instead of just watching the state take them up and out-of-state developers come in here and eat us alive? What do you guys think that we can do at this point?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think this is getting to the outside the box thinking. It's actually not the case that affordable housing and supportive housing is not profitable, or that it's impossible to turn a profit on it. It's just that you can't make as much profit as fast as you can if you build luxury housing. And that's why it's not getting built. So we absolutely need to look at solutions like community ownership and cooperative ownership. There's some really interesting things happening in other parts of the country where people are creating investment cooperatives and real estate cooperative trusts to do just that, to purchase properties as a community and renovate them into housing and into commercial space. And we absolutely can do that here.
The West Park School, that the Cabrini sisters own down in West Park, has like 7 or 8 different dorm housing units, a school that's empty. I think we have to start looking at some of these empty schools. Coleman, we might look at Tech City. There are properties at Tech City that really could have housing development on it from scratch. And Wassaic is an amazing, that could be an entire community. I mean, it's in Dutchess County, but that is stunning. And it's on the train to New York. Like, I can't even wrap my mind around the fact that it's empty. But I think, we're starting to see enough people, even the fact that we got the tenant protection law passed in New York State, I consider kind of amazing. Rashida and I were here meeting with the head of the New York Federal Reserve, and I remember thinking, it was right around the time the bill was passing, that Kingston is sending an awful lot of people. Like, they think it's a statewide thing, but meanwhile, we're sending busloads from here because we're just feeling the crunch here. But we are starting to get enough people really talking about this, where the kind of thing that you're talking about, where we need change on the state level about how we're going to deal with these former state complexes, and we need money to renovate these schools that are already public property. I think we're getting there. We're not there yet, but I feel like having, I now know we have 150 people on this call that can be called to say, like, yo, there's an affordable housing project in wherever, we need to turn people out. And that's what it's going to take. And we need to vote the right people in who care about these things and who, are going to echo our concerns on these issues and are going to take it seriously. And we need, people like me who are elected to know, like, if we don't take it seriously, then bye. We're not going to keep you.
It is 9 o'clock, and I really want to respect everyone's time. Evelyn, did you want to jump in?
I just want to comment on Chris followed up on what I said in the chat. I just wanted to say, Chris, I've seen a couple cases where you're absolutely right. A real estate investment trust is usually a very conventional vehicle for profiting off real estate, but there are cases where communities are forming real estate investment trusts to allow community members to purchase real estate and make it available as community housing. So that's a way to kind of tweak the system to use what's usually a standard practice for profiteering and turn it into a vehicle for community building.
Thank you so much. Before we all get off this call, can we please acknowledge Margie Leopold, who did an enormous amount of work to get this event happen. Not on the panel, but please, everyone, we love you, Margie. Thank you so much. Holly, too, you did so much work to make this happen. I remember the coalition.
Yes.
Big ups, and thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate all of your time and your expertise and your passion for this issue. Much love.
And interpretation, thank you.
Thank you,
Yes.
interpretation. Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Yes, thank you, Isabel. And then also, if you have questions that were not answered, we will actually loop those. If there's to a specific panelist, we'll send those to the panelists and hopefully get you connected so you can get an answer to that question.
All right, y'all. Good night.
All right, well,
Thanks,
thank you so
everyone.
much, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.